A tropical storm or hurricane is likely to form in the Caribbean Sea or the Gulf of Mexico over the next several days, and this could be a big problem for the United States if it does indeed develop, as there could be a massive storm with this, bringing a large wind field, heavy rainfall that could lead to flooding, storm surge, and perhaps even hurricane-force winds to parts of the Gulf Coast of the United States. So in today's forecast, we're going to break down exactly what the scenarios and possibilities are, and exactly why this has been so hard to forecast thus far, but why I think that there might be some sort of solution here on where this will actually be going. So we are going to begin with what's happening across the Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Mexico right now. You'll notice that the Gulf is almost dry as a bone. There's really not much happening there. The main activity that we are currently looking at is back over in the Western Caribbean Sea. Now, as of right now, we don't have any sort of tropical storm. We don't even have a low pressure system yet that's developed, which is one of the reasons why this has been a difficult forecast thus far. We don't really have anything organized, and until something organizes, we're not going to really have a great idea of where this is going to go and how intense it's going to get, but there's obviously a high ceiling with this. If you've been looking at social media, you've probably seen category 4 or 5 hurricanes posted all over the place. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen because that's obviously too extreme at this point. We don't know what's going to exactly happen, but what I do know is that there is definitely a possibility that this could be a pretty big storm, or it might just be a low-end tropical storm or even a tropical depression that just crashes into the Yucatan Peninsula or southwest Gulf of Mexico somewhere. In today's forecast, again, we're going to break down the scenarios and exactly what I think is going to happen with this system as it develops and eventually as it moves to the north towards the United States. And this is a closer view on the infrared imagery of that thunderstorm activity in the Western Caribbean Sea. You'll notice that there is no spin really around this activity. It's very minimal, if any, so we don't have a low pressure center that's developed yet. As we get closer to Monday and Tuesday, I do think we're going to eventually have a low pressure center, and once we get a low pressure center, it will become a bit more obvious on what this system is going to be doing as it moves eventually into the Gulf of Mexico. Now, the reason why we are going to be seeing tropical development here in the Western Caribbean Sea over the next several days is because we are right in the Central American gyre, and what this essentially is just a broad area of spin across Central America, and eventually as we go throughout the next few days, you're going to start to see more development, I think, in the Western Caribbean Sea, and that's going to eventually translate to some more spin and eventually some more organization, and that should be able to allow a tropical system to develop as that eventually moves to the north in that, general direction. We are going to be talking a lot about the Western Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Mexico threat in just a moment. I do want to point out we have 3 other areas of development back over in the main development region and also in the central Atlantic Ocean. Looks like a bit of a wow face, and it basically looks like that's what it is right now over in the Atlantic Ocean. We have, again, 3 areas of development there. None of these look like immediate concerns to the United States. This one could be a long-term concern for the United States, but even then, it's very uncertain since we are just so far out on that system. Really, our greatest concern, I think, over the next 7 days or so will be this area of development that is yet to form a center, but it is an area that I do think is going to likely develop into something as we get closer to either the middle or end of this week or by the weekend. This currently has a medium chance of development, but I wouldn't be surprised if we end up with a high probability of development by the National Hurricane Center at some point later today. And by the way, a medium chance of development is anywhere between 40 to 60% chance of development over the next 7 days. That's currently what this represents, but I do think it could be upgraded at some point today to be something higher than a 60% chance of development. Now, one key thing for the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean Sea is the ingredients available and the environment that it's in. And overall, we have a very favorable environment for tropical development. We essentially have all season. It's a very warm, basically, basin across the Gulf of Mexico. It's basically boiling water in a sense for tropical development. So if anything can get organized and get going, pending any wind shear or dry air being a factor, again, it's a very favorable environment. We have very warm Atlantic Ocean water temperatures right now, and this stretches, by the way, all the way into the Western Atlantic Ocean. So anything that develops essentially is in a very favorable environment here across the Atlantic and also the Gulf and Caribbean. Now, I do want to jump into the ensemble members, and this is basically like a spaghetti chart in a way, just for a certain ensemble, which this is the GFS ensembles. It'll give you an idea of intensity and also track that a lot of different basically members are showing here across the Caribbean Sea and also the Gulf of Mexico. So this is what it looks like by Monday afternoon. We are going to eventually see a little bit of development here across the Western Caribbean Sea. Notice those numbers on your screen, the 00, the 96. Basically what that means is millibars, but with the last 2 digits. So a 00 would mean 1,000 millibars, 96 would mean 996 millibars. And basically what that means is somewhere around a tropical storm or even a tropical depression here in the Western Caribbean Sea by Monday. Now, as we go into Tuesday, notice how a lot of these ensemble members eventually lift to the north, indicating that we're going to start to see some movement to the north and also a little bit of development. A few of the ensemble ensembles, not many, but a few of them do bring this to it quickly, a Category 2 type hurricane out here in the northwestern Caribbean Sea, entering into the Gulf of Mexico by Wednesday, but a lot of them still keep this around tropical storm levels or even at tropical depression levels, so not really much of anything to be concerned about essentially at that point. As we go into Thursday, a lot of the ensemble members do split up a ton, and what this essentially means is that a lot of them are either going to the northwest or going towards Florida. Now, what happens here is going to be very critical for the entire longevity of this hurricane or tropical storm, and it's going to depend a lot on our steering factors. There's basically two things that could happen, one of which we could have our jet stream dip really far down to the southeast, and troughing could actually turn this more into Florida as we go later into the work week. Now, another thing that could happen is that we don't have that trough existing at all, and instead we have a high pressure system over in like Texas or Arkansas that actually would steer this more towards Texas or Mexico. So there's a couple of different things that could happen here, and again, in a moment I'm going to tell you what I think will actually happen, but that's basically the two possibilities with this system as of right now. So notice that large split here Thursday night into Friday morning. They are basically all over the place, either over here in the southwestern Gulf or going towards Florida. So a very large spread in nature, basically meaning that any place here in the Gulf Coast could see this potential tropical storm or hurricane. Now, another thing I want to point out is the intensity of this is still a very large range. Some of these ensemble members bring this to a very strong hurricane, like a Category 3 sort of hurricane, or even worse. Some of them are still keeping it near a tropical storm or a tropical depression. So again, there's just a very large range right now when it comes to the intensity and as well as the track. And another piece to the puzzle is also going to be when this makes landfall, because some ensemble members have this making landfall Thursday night, which would only be a few days from now when you think about it. And then also some of these ensemble members keep this back over in the southern Gulf of Mexico, basically stalling there for several days. This would be by Saturday and eventually by Sunday. Most of the members have this making landfall at the latest by Sunday night or Monday morning, but there are a couple that still linger out here in the Gulf of Mexico, and actually one of them has it out here all the way until next Thursday. This would be by October 3rd. Now, I don't think that's going to happen, but it is obviously something that is, can't be ruled out at this point when it comes to this system. There's just a lot of uncertainty, but that's definitely an outlier, I would say, more than anything. All right, now we're going to talk more about my thoughts and what I think is going to happen with this potential tropical system as we go into this upcoming week. Now, granted, a lot of things are going to change over the next few days, and this forecast could easily change. There's a lot of things that we do not know because we don't have even a low pressure center yet. This was the problem with Francine. We didn't have a low pressure center until literally a couple days before landfall, and so the forecast was really all over the place. I think that's a very strong possibility here, but I do want to give you my thoughts and what I think could happen with this. So we're going to begin with the GFS model. This is one computer model. It's a deterministic model. It doesn't have a great gauge with intensity, but it does give a pretty good idea, I think, of track and landfall timing. So this is what we're looking at as we go into Thursday and Friday. It has it more as a gradual development as it enters the Gulf of Mexico. This is by Friday morning. Notice how it's in the northeastern Gulf with the heaviest of the rainfall on the north side. The GFS model, though, in this case is accounting for a lot of dry air on the southern side of this. And this is similar, or I would say somewhat similar to what Francine was like. Francine had a pretty good amount of dry air for a long period of time. This could be something like that as we go into Friday, and then eventually by Saturday morning it makes landfall here in very far western Florida near Panama City. Now, do I think this exact scenario is possible? Yes. Do I think it's definitely going to happen? Again, no. We don't really know yet if this is actually going to happen, but I do think that this is a very strong possibility. A lot of computer models have been at least showing that this can make landfall somewhere between eastern Louisiana and like basically the Big Bend of Florida, somewhere in that range, at least over the last 24 hours. I personally think if we do have something develop, it's probably going to be up in here somewhere where it makes landfall. But again, that's just my thinking. It's not a guarantee that that's going to happen, so definitely stay alert if you're anywhere else along the Gulf Coast. Now, the European model also showing similar stuff. It actually has development, though, further down to the south and west in the southwestern Gulf of Mexico. Look at how large and broad this storm essentially would be by Friday afternoon. One of the biggest things that I think we're going to be talking about over the next few days is basically the scope and the size of how large this tropical storm or hurricane could be, which could actually bring greater storm surge and also greater wind speeds to many areas like Florida, Louisiana. It could be a pretty large storm in nature, so this is definitely something that we're going to have to watch for. This is by Saturday morning. The European model still has this offshore, really broad circulation, though, not really developed into much. Eventually, by Sunday morning, the European model has this making landfall in Florida with a big rainmaker, especially for the southeast, but again, not really an intense hurricane, really just a tropical storm or a low-end hurricane. Now, the last model I'm going to show you is the European AI model. This is artificial intelligence, essentially, on a computer model. Now, one reason why I'm showing you this is, or I really have two reasons. The first one, this has been extremely accurate this hurricane season. It was very accurate with Francine days in advance, and a lot of computer models didn't catch on to it. European AI model actually caught on to it very early. Another reason why is that this is going to give you an idea of how large this wind field could be with this tropical storm or hurricane. So notice as we go into Thursday, this eventually is developing to a tropical storm in the southern Gulf of Mexico. By Friday, this is quickly moving towards Florida and has it making landfall Friday morning back over near Panama City as at least a low-end hurricane. It doesn't really show it as a very intense hurricane either. A lot of these models are not showing this really beyond a category 1 hurricane right now, which would be good news. Hopefully that's the case. Hopefully this is just something on the weaker side of things and not something, more major. But it's still a possibility that this could be more of a major hurricane depending on what we are looking at as we go throughout the week this week. But one thing I want to point out here is that this wind field is huge. Look out how large these purple and blue and red colors go. This would be tropical storm force winds and even hurricane force winds closer to the eye. That, I think, is going to be one of the biggest stories with this system, is how large this thing could literally be here across the Gulf Coast. So now to conclude this forecast, the truth essentially is we don't really know exactly what's going to happen yet, but we do think that there is going to be a tropical storm in the Gulf of Mexico at some point this week, or even a hurricane. And so we're going to have to watch this very closely. We are again in the time of the year where we could see a hurricane rapidly intensify. We had that happen with Beryl. We had that almost happen with Francine. So these are things that we need to really pay attention to, especially with a system like this that will probably be in the Gulf of Mexico for at least a couple of days. That opens the door for possibilities that this could become a rather intense hurricane if it's able to materialize and organize quick enough. But again, there's a lot of question marks whether this will become intense, where this will exactly make landfall. I still personally think this will make landfall between eastern Louisiana and Panama City, Florida. That's kind of the range that I'm thinking. Maybe as far east as the Big Bend, though. But again, it could still make landfall literally anywhere. It could go anywhere from Texas or Mexico all the way to like southern Florida. It's a very large range still. So stay tuned to the channel. We'll keep you posted with the latest, and I'll continue to give you the latest updates here on this potential tropical system as we go throughout the next several days.